Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ULT San Diego, here for the Aquarian series. This evening's presentation is Shila, and that will be given to us by Joseph Miller. But before we get started, we'd like to let you know about a few of the upcoming events here at ULT San Diego. Okay. Next week, The Justice of Karma, that's July 13th, and that presentation will be given to us by Desiree Van Sanen. The following week, Kamaloka and Devacon, that will be given to us by Dr. Eugene Jennings. And then July 27th, the astrological sign of Cancer, and that will be given to us by Jonathan Colbert. Finally, the Eye, and that's going to be given to us August 3rd by Truth Collins. So we hope that you will come out and be with us as we focus on these wonderful topics. And now we'd like to do a reading for this evening's presentation. From the Bhagavad Gita 6. This divine discipline, Arjuna, is not to be attained by the man who eateth more than enough or too little, nor by him who hath a habit of sleeping much, nor by him who is given to overwatching. The medicine which destroyeth pain is produced in him who is moderate in eating and in recreation, of moderate exertion in his actions, and regulated in sleeping and waking. When the man so living centers his heart in the true self and is exempt from attachment to all desires, he is said to have attained to yoga. Of the sage of self-centered heart, at rest and free from attachment to desires, the simile is recorded as a lamp which is sheltered from the wind flickereth not. When regulated by the practice of yoga and at rest, seeing the self by the self, he is contented. When he becometh acquainted with that boundless bliss, which is not connected with objects of the senses, and being where he is not moved from the reality, having gained which he considereth no other superior to it, and in which being fixed, he is not moved even by the greatest grief. Know that this disconnection from union with pain is distinguished as yoga, spiritual union or devotion, which is to be striven after by a man with faith and steadfastly.
Thank you very much, Monica.
Oh, thank you, Joe.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Friends, fellow students, our topic tonight is Shila. And if you're like me, perhaps you never heard of the word or the virtue of Shila before you began to study the voice of the silence. However, in Hinduism and Buddhism, the Sanskrit word Shila generally means moral discipline. It's very broad. For example, the 5 precepts that the lay Buddhist practitioners take are called Panchashila. That is 5 steps or 5 aspects of Shila. Not killing, not stealing, refraining from sexual misconduct, not lying, refraining from intoxicants, and other lists of virtues of moral discipline, of steps of moral discipline that are prescribed for Buddhist priests and monks they all have the word Shila in them in its various forms. So it's a general term. In the middle way, or the Eightfold Path, Shila also has a specific meaning. And you'll recall with the Eightfold Path, it's typically divided into 2 steps, then 3, and then 3, beginning with right view and right intention. The middle tier having to do mostly with action, right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And the lower tier having to do with the inner disciplines of right effort, right mindfulness, right meditation. The Shila has to do with that middle rung, that step that has to do with action. And indeed, the initial 2 steps are they're designated as training in wisdom. The right speech, right action, and right livelihood are training in moral discipline, Shila. And the last 3, right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation, are training in concentration, or samadhi. And it's said that for the beginner, that middle section having to do with moral discipline in the realm of action, speech and action, is the basis for success in the other 2. Unless there is moral discipline, it is impossible to gain control of the mind and master concentration. And if you can't master concentration, there's no training in wisdom. And this reminds us similarly to that expression in the Gita in chapter 6, where it tells us that Krishna says that action is said to be the means by which the wise man who is desirous of mounting to meditation may reach thereto. So cessation from action is said to be the means for him who hath reached to meditation. So mindfulness in action, mastering of action, is the first step to the moral life, it is the moral life, but it's the first step to the inward life as well, even though it involves the outward realm. And the wisdom traditions seem to be unanimous in telling us we can't get away from that. Of course, as we mentioned, Shila appears in the paramitas, called the transcendental virtues, paramita, and you're probably familiar with the list. There are traditionally 6 of them. I just put in brackets viraga because in the Voice of the Silence, and I'm sure other traditional lists, it is added as the middle gate, the gate of balance, as it's called in the Voice. These transcendental virtues are described in the Voice to be keys, and we can only guess that if there are keys, there has to be locks as well. The key is not of any value to us unless there were a lock. So failure to come to grips with the locks will hold us back and dissipate our strength, our concentration, etc. And so you can easily divide. I mean, I just made this list up, but obviously the opposite of dana would be greed. Shila, I put dissoluteness, and we'll go into why I have described it as that. But Shila being moral discipline, it makes sense that its opposite would be dissoluteness. The opposite of Shanti would be impatience. Viraga, attachment. The opposite of Virya would be irresolution or indetermination. Dhyana, obviously its opposite is distraction. And prajna, avidya, or ignorance. And as the Dalai Lama tells us, in the East, avidya, or ignorance, is not merely the absence of wisdom. It's not merely not knowing, but it's an active misapprehension, active consent to take part in illusion and to contribute to illusion, to compound illusion, we could say. So it's clear we would be held in these locks if there weren't these virtues. Now, though, Shila is described in the third fragment where the keys are being listed in this way. Shila, the key of harmony in word and act, the key that counterbalances the cause and the effect, and leaves no further room for karmic action. I think the first thing we kind of grasp from that is it's portraying Shila as a kind of integrity, an integration, harmony in word and act. And it's, as we'll see, it's going to imply intrapersonal integrity, but also interpersonal integrity. So as we integrate the aspects of ourselves, as we become resolute and we come to terms with our own divided loyalties and divided will, as we gain that integrity, we also become a more greater contributor to community binding. And one of my favorite descriptions of that kind of sterling integrity comes from A Course in Miracles, and it's a very exacting and high discipline here, though. But speaking about the integration of thought, word, and deed, speaking about honesty, the word honesty, we typically externalize it and think it's just some kind of verbal behavior. But the Course says honesty does not apply only to what you say. The term actually means consistency. There is nothing you say that contradicts what you think or do. No thought opposes any other thought. No act belies your word. And no word lacks agreement with another. Such are the truly honest. At no level are they in conflict with themselves. Therefore, it is impossible for them to be in conflict with anyone or anything. So I think immediately Shila is showing us this internal integrity and external integrity. They go together. In the description, in the seven portals, it speaks about harmony and counterbalance, right? The key to harmony in word and act, the key that counterbalances the cause and the effect and leaves no further room for karmic action. One time I was with a senior theosophist and another student, and he was asking us, we were talking, and he had us go through from memory the different keys. And when my friend, when he came to the Shila key, he said, the key that counterbalances the cause and the effect. And the senior theosophist looked at me and said, Joe, is that correct? And I said, yes. And then he just paused. He waited and waited and waited. And suddenly we realized, oh yeah, there's that earlier phrase, harmony in word and act. And he said that was a significant omission. We immediately go to some kind of mechanical view, counterbalancing, some kind of mechanical view, external view, behavioristic view, and we forget the real importance of that first phrase, harmony in word and act, and everything that harmony suggests. Because of course, harmony is associated with music and with order and with concord and with deep feelings of concord. All of that is present in harmony. Yes, there are the external counterbalancing effects, but without harmony, you lose the soul of what is meant by Shila. Now, it's interesting, if you know the third fragment, you know that there is the list that happens, and then there is going to be this sequence of very dramatic language of walking through the ports. And you're familiar with that. It begins with, armed with the key of charity, of love and tender mercy, thou art secure before the gate of Dana. And it goes on, it talks about how it's like a sunny glade in the depth of forest depths, a spot on earth mirrored from Amitabha's paradise. But actually between the beginning of that sequence with Dana and what had come before, the list of the paramitas, there are some intervening passages, which if you look at them, they sound very much like Shila. They have a lot of Shila signaling, we could say, with the words harmony, accord, attune, feeling, thrill, compliance. So we're going to take a few minutes and look at these passages. And I want to ask Jonathan if he could read this first selection. And look at what I've put in bold.
217 through 221, or just 217?
Just, yeah, this whole page.
Okay. Before thou canst approach the foremost gate, thou hast to learn to part thy body from thy mind, to dissipate the shadow, and to live in the eternal. For this thou hast to live and breathe in all, as all that thou perceivest breathes in thee. To feel thyself abiding in all things in self. Thou shalt not let thy senses make a playground of thy mind. Thou shalt not separate thy being from being and the rest, but merge the ocean in the drop within the ocean. So shalt thou be in full accord, which all that lives. Bear love to men as though they were thy brother pupils, disciples of one teacher, the sons of one sweet mother. Of teachers there are many. The master soul is one, Alaya, the universal soul. Live in that master as its ray in thee. Live in thy fellows as they live in it.
Thank you, Jonathan. So it really struck me that this notion of harmony in word and act, or harmony in general, harmonizing the mind with the soul, harmonizing the inner aspects of the self, and to be in accord with all that lives. This seems to be the language of Shila in the broadest sense. And Jonathan, could you read this next section too?
Sure. Thou hast to be prepared to answer Dharma, the stern law, whose voice will ask thee at thy initial step, hast thou complied with all the rules, O thou of lofty hopes? Hast thou attuned thy heart and mind to the great mind and heart of all mankind? For as the sacred river's roaring voice, whereby all nature's sounds are echoed back, so must the heart of him who in the stream would enter thrill in response to every sigh and thought of all that lives and breathes.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, and complying with the rules, well, remembering that Shila is often described as moral discipline, and it often implies rules. And then there's this language of sound, right? The attuning the heart and mind, thrilling in response. If you've ever had a guitar in a room and dropped a book in the room, there's a loud percussive sound from the book, and then the strings of the guitar will resonate afterwards. They will thrill in the response to that sound. And then, of course, then right before it begins that passage on climbing the different steps, there is a very obvious passage about harmony in music. Disciples may be likened to the strings of the soul echoing vina, mankind unto its sounding board, the hand that sweeps it to the tuneful breath of the great world soul, the string that fails to answer neath the master's touch, in dulcet harmony with all the others breaks and is cast away. So the collective minds of Lanu Shravakas. They have to be attuned to the Upadhyaya's mind, one with the oversoul, or break away. And then the voice asks the reader, hast thou attuned thy being to humanity's great pain, O candidate for light? Thou hast, thou mayest enter. So, so then what's interesting is, right, there is that passage about the wide gate of Dana and the sunny glade and the forest depths and birds of radiant plumage sing, etc. And then we come to the Shila gate. And what does the Shila gate give us? It gives us fear and doubt. Isn't that interesting? It's a very good question to ask why that would be the case. Again, the language of the voice. And to the second gate, the way is verdant too, but it is steep and winds uphill, yea, to its rocky top. Great mists will overhang its rough and stony height, and all be dark beyond. As on he goes, the song of hope soundeth more feeble in the pilgrim's heart. The thrill of doubt is now upon him, his step less steady grows. Beware of this, O candidate, beware of fear that spreadeth like the black and soundless wings of midnight bat, between the moonlight of thy soul and the great goal that loometh in the distance far away. Fear, O disciple, kills the will and stays all action. If lacking in the Shila virtue, the pilgrim trips, and karmic pebbles bruise his feet along the rocky path. So why should that be? Why would the practice of Shila, the approach of Shila, stimulate fear and doubt? It's a very interesting question. If we look in the Dhammapada, we find passages that may illumine this. For example, in the 3rd chapter, we have, whatever an enemy may do to an enemy, whatever a hater may do to a hater, a wrongly directed mind will do to us greater harm. Is it that the Shila virtue is helping us to see that we are our own enemy? It isn't an external enemy, that we ourselves do real harm to our progress through negligence. Fear there is not for him whose mind is not burning with desires, and which, having risen above likes and dislikes, is serene. He is awakened. So is fear always an indication of desire? Of desires that are out of accord with our own deepest intuitions and resolutions that we've taken? Is it that the moment we start coming to terms with inner harmony, we are faced with the inconsistencies in our nature? They are aggravated and brought to the forefront. We see face to face our divided loyalties. We see our hypocrisy. We come to terms with our own discontinuities in discipline and in mindfulness, and this raises fear. It makes us doubtful. We doubt ourselves. And if we are into self-justification, then we doubt the path outside of ourselves. We may doubt the wisdom itself. So it's in summoning the will to harmony. It's a serious step, and there are real inner consequences. When we speak about Shila, it's not like if you grew up in a Christian upbringing, the notion was, well, you want to follow certain moral virtues because they're pleasing to God. You want to follow them because those are what the rules is. It's the will of God. In Buddhism and in the East, there's a rational explanation for these. That the pursuit of moral discipline creates an integrity that gives us strength and clarity and firmness, and helps us to have what it takes to pursue the difficulties and complexities of the path. For example, a few passages from the Dhammapada. Whoso lives pursuing pleasures, his senses unrestrained, immoderate in eating, indolent, devitalized, him verily doth Mara uproot, as a gale a weak tree. So Shila is going to gird our strength. Whoso lives disciplining himself, unmindful of pleasures, his senses restrained, moderate in eating, full of faith and dauntless energy, him verily Mara doth not overturn, as a gate does not overturn a rock. And of course, concentration. Two of my favorite lines from the Dhammapada. Rains pour into an ill-thatched house, desires pour into an ill-trained mind. Rains wet not a well-thatched house, desires enter not a disciplined mind. So there are real rewards in terms of strength and concentration that come with Shila, and something that we can verify directly by our experience. And so the authority for this and the experience is from within, and it appeals to reason. Again, Shila is protecting us. Our vigilance is a form of protection. what is dearest to us, of what is inmost within us, continually grows the glory of that man who is wakeful and mindful, whose deeds are pure, whose acts are deliberate, who is self-controlled, and who lives according to law, by endeavor, by vigilance, by discipline and self-control. Let the wise man make for himself an island which no flood can overwhelm. Fools and witless persons give themselves to sloth. The wise value vigilance as their best treasure. Be not a sluggard. Have no dalliance with lust and sense delights. He who meditates with earnestness attains great joy. So the Dhammapada, in its delightful and clear way, is giving us this portrait of the strength and girdedness that Shila gives us versus the dissolute qualities that come with neglect. And one of my favorite metaphors is the arrow. The Dhammapada says, just as a fletcher makes straight his arrow, the wise man makes straight his crooked thinking. This is difficult to guard. This is hard to restrain. And if you think about an arrow, when you release it, it's subject to great forces. It's suddenly propelled very rapidly, and any slight imbalance in the way it's built, in its tail, and the straightness of the shaft, and the way the arrowhead is molded and put onto the shaft. Any mistake there will get amplified as the dynamic forces of propulsion are enacted. So also, the arrow of the self needs to be shaped very carefully, because as we pursue in the path of spiritual development and service, we will be under greater and greater forces, greater and greater energies. And those energies will throw us off and unbalance us, just like the arrow, if there's not a really strong basis in Shila. So again, threading our way, thinking about this metaphor of harmony, it seems like we can learn some more lessons about Shila by thinking of it a little bit more. You know, if you were shown a stringed instrument like the veena or like a guitar, but you didn't know what they were, you'd never heard music from them, or you didn't know they were an instrument, it may be that you would look at that neck and the way it's all marked off and think you're looking at some sort of measuring device. And indeed, even though it sounds funny to think about that, it's very true. The neck of a stringed instrument is a measuring device. It's all measured off very carefully according to the mathematical laws of dividing the string according to the various intervals. And in fact, a veena player or a guitar player is, in fact, measuring out those strings as they are compressing them, they're shortening the string, they're lengthening the string according to certain proportions that give us the experience, the feelings of harmony that compel us with the music. So measurement is really essential to harmony. And if you took, for example, just looked at a Bach prelude, you just looking at the sheet music, there's measurement all over. I mean, for example, you have the key signature, in this case, the key of E, but it's telling you what diatonic scale to use. It's defining and designating that diatonic scale and no other. You're measuring time. So not only the key, you're measuring time by these vertical lines that are dividing what are called the measures. They are the measures. In this case, the 4/4 that you see next to the key signature is telling us for every quarter note there will be 4 beats. 4 beats in each measure, and each beat is associated with a quarter tone. And not only that, but there's also, just the staff itself. The staff itself is measuring tonality, stacking the notes between high notes, which are higher frequency, and low notes. So measurement is essential to music and to, therefore, the production of harmony. Pico della Mirandola, the light of the Renaissance, enunciated Platonic and Pythagorean views when he said, everything that man accomplishes or does, that he teaches or wants to learn, must have its right portion. It must follow its own line and remain within its circle, to the end that a balance be preserved and there be no crooked thing, that nothing exceed the circle. And indeed, through the Platonic and Pythagorean traditions, and then the Renaissance of Platonism in Italy, we find this notion that what we see in mathematical proportions and musical proportions applies to the inner life as well, to the moral life and also to the social life. In fact, very, very famous Greek proverb is metron ariston, or measure is best. And here it may be telling you that measure is best with your morning coffee, or the fact that the donut is cut off partway. It may be that, cut off for your moral discipline, cut off your donuts. I'm not sure. Measure is best. And when we think about measure and temperance, we think about Socrates and his description of the tripart soul, the three-parted soul that we get in the Republic and elsewhere, and this virtue of sophrosine, which literally means soundness of mind, but implies temperance. And if you recall, according to the Platonic tradition, the soul is divided into three parts: logos, which is the reasoning part associated with the head; thumos, which is the spirited or will part associated with the heart, with the chest; and eros, or the appetitive part, which is associated with the appetite and sexual appetite. And so reason, this would be roughly one English equivalent: reason, will, energy, and appetite. And each of these is associated with a particular virtue. So logos, or reason, finds its perfection in wisdom. Thumos finds its perfection in courage. And eros finds its proper boundaries with sophrosine. And so courage, being in the middle, or thumos in the middle, it looks to logos for its guidance, and then it enacts custodianship over the eros, over the appetitive quality. Each of these has its specific virtue, but it's only when they find their specific virtue that they can be bound together into a fourth virtue, which is justice. What in the Republic, dikaiosune is the Greek word justice, or harmony. So it's this notion of harmony. Harmonia is an essential thread through the Pythagorean tradition and Platonic tradition. The root harm has to do is an old shipbuilding term that has to do with joining, with joints, so to hold together. So we have these four qualities, and we can see that sophrosine, or eros, the balance of the appetites. The appetites are important, but they have to fulfill their own part. And it's when thumos inclines away from the wisdom of the logos and becomes a servant of eros, that things go awry, and that you lose harmony, you lose strength, you become dissolute. Just a kind of a summary here: moral precepts function as delineations and boundaries within a practitioner's life. Like the time signature or key signature in music, Shila provides definition that paradoxically liberates. So our strength is liberated as we are not enslaved to the passions, to distortions. And yet this happens through discipline, through what feels like a confinement. And you remember in the 18th chapter of the Gita, what is at first tastes like poison is nectar in the end, but what tastes like nectar at the beginning can be poison in the end. And one of my one of my favorite poems about this, the confinement of the confinement of discipline to release something greater, is by Wordsworth, where it's addressing the weight of too much liberty, as he says, which is such a great line. And it's a poem about the sonnet, that he would restrict himself to the sonnet form. Poets like Wordsworth, will restrict themselves to a particular form in order to release creativity. And he compares the sonnet form, his confining his poetic powers, to all these analogies of confinement in life. So he says, nuns fret not at their convent's narrow room, and hermits are and hermits are contented with their cells, and students with their pensive citadels. Maids at the wheel, the weaver at his loom, sit blithe and happy, bees that soar for bloom, high as the highest peak of Furness Fells, will murmur by the hour in foxglove bells. In truth, the prison, into which we doom ourselves no prison is. And hence for me, in sundry moods, 'twas pastime to be bound within the sonnet's scanty plot of ground. Pleased if some souls, for such their needs must be, who have felt the weight of too much liberty, should find brief solace there, as I have found. So a kind of sonnet Shila, so to speak. There's the problem of rules. The problem of externalization is that what we are prone to externalization. We're prone to again and again define moral in behavioristic terms, and believe we can judge people from the outside. And you get what you could call the Pharisee complex. If you read the Gospels, you see that Jesus and his followers are being followed around by temple authorities who are trying to find fault, trying to blame them for breaking the letter of the law. And of course, the meaning of Jesus's teaching, if anything, is to put the onus back on the letter, to show the living, flexible, plastic power of the letter over the law. And this cartoon I've always been fond of. Jesus saying to the to modern Pharisees, the difference between me and you is you use scripture to determine what love means, and I use love to determine what scripture means. So it seems like again and again we can't be, even if we come up with the best set of rules, to merely follow those rules and check them off. That can still be some kind of ego gratification device. It can be defining ourselves wholly in external terms. So again and again, we have to free ourselves and look for the transcendental aspect. It reminds me that the paramitas are called the transcendental virtues, and because prajna is transcendental. Prajna, the experience of prajna can't be formulated. It's no concept. It can't be put into words. It can't be put into a particular school. As the Dhammapada says, the Buddha the Tathagata leaves no footprints. So there's this transcendental aspect to the inner life. And all of these rules are nothing if we only use them to make ourselves feel egotistically good. And then what's worse is to use them as a bludgeon on other people who aren't following the rules as we think they should be. And in that spirit, of course, you'll remember in the Bhagavad Gita 2, there are these lines. Jonathan, could you read these lines for us?
Rites and ceremonies. The unwise, delighting in the controversies of the Vedas, tainted with worldly lusts, and preferring a transient enjoyment of heaven to eternal absorption, whilst they declare there is no other reward, pronounce, for the attainment of worldly riches and enjoyments, flowery sentences which promise rewards in future births for present action, ordaining also many special ceremonies, the fruit of which is merit leading to power and objects of enjoyment. But those who thus desire riches and enjoyment have no certainty of soul, and least hold on meditation. As many benefits as there are in a tank stretching free on all sides, so many are there for a truth realizing Brahman in all the Vedic rites, Bhagavad Gita too.
So this is an old story. We can mistake Shila or moral discipline for the rites and ceremonies and rules of a particular religious form. And what happens then is those become corrupt, and rather than really working to eradicate ignorance from the heart, they become apologies for seeking worldly ends. So this is a very old story, as Krishna teaches here. That last line about the tank, this is, I've always thought Judge's translation is a little bit awkward. I think the more accurate translation is that if you live on a land that's flooded on all sides, you don't have a use for a water tank. So if the tank of your religion is the soul, is the way you contain and treasure wisdom, you're neglecting what is boundless on the outsides. And for the truth realizing Brahman, who lives in the infinite truth, he has no use for a water tank because it's his land is flooded with wisdom on all sides. Again, the transcendental aspect. And so Shila has to do with this harmony and harmonizing. I love the way the voice of the silence speaks about harmonizing the mind and soul, rather than allowing the mind to become enmeshed with kama. The mind has to encourage, develop, listen to the voice of the silence within. For mind is like a mirror. It gathers dust while it reflects. It needs the gentle breezes of soul wisdom to brush away the dust of our illusions. Seek, O beginner, to blend thy mind and soul. And of course, I think the practice of Shila is a gentle practice if we're diligent and stay at it. If we find ourselves wandering and we try to come back to moral discipline with a harsh attitude and with some kind of notion of purification by harsh means, it's not the gentle breezes of soul wisdom. It's the club of egotism, really, because there is no self-concern where there's true wisdom, it seems. And Thoreau, really, in speaking about the same thing in those wonderful lines from Walden, if a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away. So we want to harmonize our mind and our feelings to what is deep and inward. And that requires then we take steps to turn ourselves away from worldly delusions, as the voice says, to begin to question and separate out sensibilities and alliances we've made through this life and many other lives that are avidya. So both of those processes are necessary. We have to hear the inner voice, but we also have to consciously and in a detailed way begin to neutralize those affinities we have which are not helpful, which means we have to recognize them first, of course. The practitioner of Shila is a harmonizing agent within and without. She observes measure and proportion in thought, will, and feeling. She is a thoughtful and circumspect person who accepts the constants, yet moves creatively within the variables of any situation. And so she is self-governing, logoic, and does not depend on pleasure and pain to correct her path and unfold her destiny, which we're reminded is, of course, the language of karma. The language of karma is where we are not our own taskmasters, where we are not voluntarily undertaking this process of inner harmony. We are then subject to bruise our feet with karmic pebbles or karmic boulders even. I wonder, probably, I think this is my last slide. Probably one of the best ways for us to think about Shila, or the practice of Shila, is to be circumspect each day, as is recommended in the Pythagorean tradition. And here the poet Isaac Watts puts the Pythagorean review in a measured poetic form. Monica, do you want to read us this poem to close us out?
You have to
Or Jonathan.
unmute yourself,
Okay,
Monica.
unmuted.
Perfect.
This by Isaac Watts. Let not soft slumber close your eyes before you've recollected thrice the train of action through the day. Where have my feet chose out their way? What have I learnt where I've been? From all I've heard, from all I've seen, what have I more that's worth the knowing? What have I done that's worth the doing? What have I sought that I should shun? What duty have I left undone? Or into what new follies run? These self-inquiries are the road that lead to virtue and to God. Thank you so much, our own Joe Miller. What a wonderful presentation. I think now we'll open up to questions, but I have one to start off with. And that is, I think a couple of slides back, it was referred to regarding Shila and harmonizing both mind and soul. How does one best approach and handle the skandhas that we may have, or the karmic episodes in our life, without the judgmental aspect that you briefly spoke of? In other words, how do we first get into the mindset of correcting ourselves and seeing what's wrong externally as well, without falling into this judgmental sort of dalliance that the ego seems to easily pull one into?
A good question, and one I'm sure everyone in this Zoom room has dealt with. And that phrase, gentle breezes of using the gentle breezes of soul wisdom, I thought it came across in a new, beautiful way for me, thinking about that. It has been said that, often said that we're to focus on, to put our chief attention on our strengths, our chief attention on our ideals and on our devotions, and to not feed our preoccupation with negativity unnecessarily. And this is the thing, is the mind falls into vortexes of self-blame, of feeling unworthy, of feeling soiled, of feeling wasted, whatever it might be. It's easy, the mind plays tricks on that. So we need a strong philosophical basis by which to approach that, because we need a strong basis in thought. One of the things to keep in mind is that error is always finite, but the resourcefulness of the universe is infinite. And that means our own resourcefulness, our own ability to resurrect, to regenerate. The word I was trying to think of was regenerate. The capacity for regeneration, which is behind us, is not our own. We don't possess it as an ego. It belongs to the cosmos. It belongs to the spirit within us, and it knows no limit. But error is always finite. The skandhas, even though they seem enormous to us, they are finite compared to the long run. And you know those, and the stories were given, like the Buddha encountering Agunimala, and I may be mispronouncing that name, but that vicious thief and terrorist who was, haunting the forest and terrorizing people and cutting off their fingers and making a necklace of them and all that. But in the presence of the Buddha's wisdom and what he called forth in him, what was that? What was that horrible karma, which we would judge to be irredeemable, which would be absolutely the reason we should dismiss this soul forever? From the universe's standpoint, that's not the case. And he was able to reform. And yes, he had to work off karma, and he experienced a lot of pain. But I think that's always the emphasis, is so sin and fault is always finite, but the regenerative capacity of the universe is infinite. And we should rejoice in that, and we should know that that's very true about us as well.
Thank you so much. Judy Salzman has a question. Hi, Judy. Unmute yourself. There we go.
Yeah, Joe, thanks for a really great, clear presentation. I don't know what other experience other people have, but I find the Shila virtue to be one of the most difficult to practice because the lower mind seems to deceive oneself. Like I once thought, well, now that I'm old, I won't get into any more karmic trouble. Well, I mean, that's ridiculous, conceited idea, because of course I could say the wrong thing. I could be unkind. Perhaps I'm not tearing around on a motorcycle anymore, but I could still do a lot of things. But what I found over the years is that doing the Pythagorean injunction, reviewing the events of the day 3 times before one goes to sleep, it helps a great deal in the Shila virtue, because you think, well, perhaps I could have been kinder in response, or I could have been more logical in argument, or I could have done that better. And not to beat yourself up over it. I remember a friend of mine said, oh, I couldn't do that, I'd beat myself up. No, that's not the purpose. And you also don't feel guilty if you don't do it once in a while, or fall asleep doing it, but try to do it. And I think it helps a great deal. And I would like to share that, because I wonder what your experience is and what the experience of others might be in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Great comment. Yes, if we don't, the unreflected life is not worth living. If we just let the events from the day just wash down the river of time with no reflection, then what good have they done us? And then we have to, through external events, we have to learn the lessons again. We have to rely on externals. It's not really taking the bit in our own mouth, which is, I think, what the Shila virtue is reminding us to do. And I think that's poignant that your friend said, well, that would just make me feel bad. I mean, what is the assumption there? Is that we need to remain ignorant of our faults in order to maintain self-esteem. Well, what value would that self-esteem be if it requires ignorance to support it? So, and this is the thing, we have to do it impersonally. We want to look at it, with measure and logic and the compass, and we want to look at it impersonally. And I think that kind of review helps. The more we can be self-reflective, the more we can look at our faults the way we would look at if they were belonging to another. Or there's shared skandhas, there's shared faults that have to do with our particular culture, our particular time, our particular race. So we look at all of that, but there's no way they can be cleared up unless we're conscious of them, and unless we come up with strategies for dealing with them. So we have to become conscious of them. So thank you, Judy.
You nice stripes.
Hi, Shoba. Shoba has a question.
Hi. What a thought-provoking performance, Joseph. It was beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you, Shila.
My question is, as a follow-up to Judy's, this whole thing with Shila, when you talked about this thing about looking at ourselves kind of objectively, right? So that we can examine ourselves. Isn't there a certain kind of detachment? Isn't a certain kind of detachment here
Yeah.
which is called forth?
Yes, absolutely right. Exactly, which goes back to a philosophical basis. Theosophy is trying to get us to first consider and then think about and dwell on until we begin to realize that we are not the body, that we are a mind being going through an educational process using a series of instruments. And when we begin to take that standpoint, then we can begin that step, whereas I'm not the body, but then the much harder step is I'm not the person. I'm not a person. I'm not the sort of thing that is a personality. It is a role I play. It is a composite of a number of affinities, of habits, of customs. We have to gain detachment about that. Otherwise, the self-study will always be threatening because we're foolish and we're trying to see ourselves as a personality, and that will always result in pain.
Also, as a follow up, I was just thinking that these paramitas cannot be studied one by one by one. I think we need to be working at them from a holistic point of view, maybe looking at them all together. Sometimes, I think we don't think, okay, we've conquered Dana, let's get to Sheila now. I think we are
Yes.
conquering all of them all of the time.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And we may read the list and think, oh, well, Dhyana and Prajna are so high that obviously I'm only going to work on the first five. But it's a mistake. I think there was an article by BP Wadia or something talking about, that there's at the very beginning, Dhyana and Prajna, even if we just take it as mental discipline of concentration and the elementary wisdom that it's necessary. We are working on all of them together. It would be impossible to master Shila in and of itself. It makes no sense to consider it without also considering generosity, detachment, determination, etc. Thank you.
And I love that poem by Wordsworth. Thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I love that poem too. Yeah.
Yes, that was lovely. I had another thing I'd like to hear you say something about, Joe, and that was once again the pairs of opposites, the discipline and structure. Let's say the musical instrument and the freedom that it affords us in being disciplined in that way. Could you talk a little bit more about that and the application of that in daily life, in work, or in relationships?
Yes. Thank you. Yes. I think the very notion of freedom requires a lot of careful thought. Why is everyone wants to say, well, freedom's desirable, freedom, we want freedom. But what does that mean exactly? What do we want to free in ourselves that we feel is being imprisoned, or, and, if it is merely a lot of repressed frustration and animosity and all the, if it's a lot of these lower desires that I if they were liberated, I would finally be happy. It shows a very low level of spiritual culture or philosophical culture. So we have to really think about that. Freedom is always, it's always double. It's freedom from and freedom for. So there's freedom, we want something, we're being inhibited from something. Is that a noble and desirable object? Have we really thought about that? Is it a sustainable joy? Does it contribute to the long run? And then what is it that's holding us back? What is it freedom from? And so the discipline, the moment we start talking about discipline, it confronts all this, because we, as if you have spent time with young children and they have to face discipline, they don't want to. They don't want to do their homework. They don't want to, because it means it's a very painful constraining, and it feels, all they feel is the imprisonment. And so, but it's very true. Wynton Marsalis, the wonderful trumpet player and founder of Jazz at Lincoln Center,
Yeah.
he goes around and he gives workshops and stuff. And he wrote a book talking about the illusions of freedom in jazz. That, the moment a young musician hears, oh yeah, well, jazz, that's it, you're free to play anything you want. And that's true. That's true, but it's not what you think. It doesn't mean you could just do anything. It means you have to master a very, very difficult discipline. You have to master, all of everything we've learned from classical music about tonality and the different keys, and you have to learn all these different scales, and you have to learn, develop a vocabulary of riffs. It's like developing a whole language and having them embedded in your reflexes, so that at a slight inspiration, these will take over and come on and be used appropriately and all of that. So freedom is always on the freedom we want is always on the far side of the river of discipline.
Yes.
Any freedom that's offered us on the near side of the river of discipline, turn away from that. That's not real freedom. And so this applies to everything, in life. And, and we do, as we mature, that is a mark of maturity, is not only surrendering to discipline, but learning to enjoy it and beginning to experience the important transformation it does to us, and that it, develops us as minds and hearts, and makes us more serviceable to others, and helps us enjoy the ordinariness of life, and do our jobs and our duties with more excellence. And of course, people sometimes study a language, or they take on a musical instrument, and they can, once you learn that essential archetypal lesson, then it makes you more willing to take on a discipline and try another skill, and more patient with yourself. So it's an archetypal truth. It's very, very important.
Thank you so much. You're reminding me of a statement. I think the musician John Coltrane said that it takes a tremendous amount of discipline to be free. It takes a tremendous amount of practice to improvise. So,
yeah, because someone like Coltrane, I mean, he was freeing. There's a musical equivalent to the voice of the silence, this inner voice,
yes,
which speaks in a quiet way within the musician. But do you have what's developed, the sounding board of your reflexes and your imagination, to give it free play, to allow it to find voice? You have to build that instrument.
yes.
I mean, the same thing's true about the Dutch graphic artist M.C. Escher. And he as a young artist, he was driven. He says in the introduction to one of his books, he was driven to master the all aspects of drawing and illustration, and he was always the top of his class, and he was tremendous ego, and was driven, and it was very gratifying. And then he got to the peak of that mountain, and he was like, now what? And he grew very despondent suddenly. It seemed extremely empty. And then this other thing took over in him, which he said was an intense desire to communicate abstract ideas to other people. And then he suddenly saw everything he had done, that whole passion, that boyish passion, was merely developing an instrument by which he could then begin this other quest of communicating with others.
Magnificent. Thank you so much. Do we have any other comments or questions? Jonathan?
You know how in theosophy, in the metaphysics of theosophy, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and, as the cosmos unfolds, and even as humanity unfolds, is there some kind of a parallel with that, with right action?
Well, I think there is. I think I'm reminded, I'm reminded that the book of Jean, the HPB says in the Secret Doctrine that Jean means meditation. It means regeneration through meditation. And what seems to be described in the book of John as an external cosmogony seems to, as much as it might be true about an external cosmogony, it seems its deeper import has to do with the science of self-regeneration. And I think within that you could find, aspects of Shila. I mean, if take, for example, a very basic principle in the secret doctrine cosmogony that she articulates in those passages leading up to the three fundamentals, where she says that the student has to grasp the difference between the unconditioned ground of the universe that is ineffable, that nothing can be said about it, no concept is it's unspeakable, unthinkable, unsensible. You have to draw a huge line between that and then the logos, the being of the universe, the conditioned being of the universe that periodically unfolds and goes back. And so why does she emphasize that so much? That seems very important for us to grasp that there's some correlate to thinking about what is an eternal ground of being. There's an eternal ground to mind, an eternal ground to our awareness. There's something unspeakable, unthinkable, something that entertains the concepts, or that provides the basis for concepts, thoughts, percepts, experiences, but is itself eternal and untouched. Whereas our conditioned experience is everything is more like the logos. And so I think we, until we act logoic, until we begin to understand the conditioned part of ourselves, we can't sort of open the skylight of the window to begin to gain some intuition of what this groundless, this conditionless ground is. But I think there's some parallel. But Jonathan, do you have something particular you had in mind?
Well, I think so. If a person plans things out, they're kind of doing things on an invisible plane before they go do it. Things like that. Noetic anticipation, visualization.
Yes.
It's invisible. Well, the visualization is invisible, but at least to other people it is. In your own mind, it's kind of visible. But if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. Otherwise, we're just sort of bungling into action. The idea that to do things on a subtler plane, to do what we can on the subtler plane before we roll the dice of action.
Before we roll the dice, yes. Because things don't come out exactly the way you thought them. So there's still some flexibility there. But in other words, establishing harmony at the level of thought and care.
Yeah.
The caring imagination and establishing harmony and even anticipating things that could go wrong, perhaps, without getting too paranoid about that. But almost as if it could be like a daily review, but at the beginning of the day. I don't know what that would be called, but a daily
Preview.
Review. Yeah.
Preview.
Yeah,
a daily preview. I mean, to me, a lot of times it's as simple as seeing that moral discipline has two essential feet: stabilizing the mind and purifying the heart. So what am I doing to stabilize the mind? Can I set aside certain portions of the day, perhaps it's only a minute or two, where I'm just going to remember, oh yeah, I should be stabilizing the mind all the time rather than the runaway. So you got to stabilize the mind, but you're also purifying the heart. That is, you're sifting your values. What is really important to me? What have been the high points of this life? What has really, really spoken to me? Am I true to that? Do I remind myself of that? What have been my golden moments? Obviously, I can't do the latter, purify my heart, unless I have some stability of mind to do it. And on the other hand, what gives stability of mind but our deepest values? Loyalty to our deepest values works to stabilize the mind. So the two work together. You know, you can't stabilize the mind through some kind of brute exertion of egotism. It'll work to some point, but it won't work past that. It's through the stability of the heart. It's through that notion of devotion that that begins to show us what true concentration is, because it involves both.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Questions, comments? Yes, Judy.
Judy, you're muted.
How is it now?
Good to
Hear
go.
you.
Good. I have a question about harmony. At a martial arts school I used to attend, it said in Chinese characters, harmony, happiness, wisdom, tranquility, prosperity. And I think it comes from Confucius, because it would be clear that in any business or family or enterprise, without a foundation of harmony, you could never get to prosperity. You'd have a dysfunctional family or failed business or enterprise. And that would be very important in the Shila virtue. I think you're right that it's not just a mechanical balance the cause and the effect, but are you living harmoniously like the Native Americans have taught us to live harmoniously with nature, and we'll be healthy. And unfortunately, we don't. We tear around in cars and eat fast foods. And that's not creating much harmony with Gaia. So I wondered if you could address this in regard to the Shila virtue. Thanks.
Your comment, Judy, reminded me, and perhaps somebody else can remember the quote literally, but in Mr. Judge's letters, he talks about that harmony comes through the balancing of differences, and that the attempt to create harmony by force always fails. So that's a very interesting thing to think about. It reminds me of that principle from the Aquarian axioms about that you can't build a temple of truth by hammering dead stones. The foundations have to precipitate themselves like crystals from the solution of life. So that's very interesting, because it means you can't create the crystals by will. What you do is the solution. You work on the solution. That is, it's a chemical solution. You're always involved in the alchemy of dissolving, of keeping the solution pure, balanced, homogeneous, living, fluid, and then you allow the crystals to form. That's how the temple gets built. It doesn't get built by hammering dead stones. And so also with harmony. I mean, we may value harmony, but can we get it just by grasping at it? Can we get it? Can we force it down someone's throat? Can we, coerce others into being harmonious? We can't. It comes from the feeling nature. Harmony has to do with trust, and therefore openness, and any kind of force immediately closes down the heart and immediately creates defensiveness and walls. And you may get play acting of harmony, but everybody's going to be bad mouthing each other behind their back. So we really, it's a really important point that harmony is it presumes something else. It presumes this alchemical work behind the scenes, and it was interesting. I've always seen that with really good leaders. Unfortunately, I've met a few, and I've read about a few. They always insisted on diversity. It's like Lincoln's cabinet. They always do that. They always want the utmost diversity. This wonderful sergeant of a choir director I had, just the most diverse group of singers from diverse political backgrounds and gender orientations and everything else. It was that balancing of diversities that was so important, and not trying to create a hard uniformity. A hard uniformity doesn't work. It does not create harmony. It creates, jackboot soldiers, but it doesn't create harmony.
Wonderful. More comments, questions? I think you have us all in the most glorious meditative state, Joseph Miller. These ideas just penetrate the heart as well as the mind, particularly in the way that you express them. And I'm just so appreciative for this talk you've given.
Thank you very much, Monica. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Yes. All right, then, I guess we will say good evening. We'd like to remind you that, let me see. Next week, justice, and that will be given to us by Desiree Van Sanen. So we hope that you will come back and be with us as we focus on yet another amazing theosophical topic. So until then, everybody be well safe. Namaste. And we'll see you
Thank
next.
you, ULT San Diego. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Namaste.
Joe.
So much.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone. That was a great talk. Bye.
So good.